Hello and welcome to another episode of The Modern Nerd. I am Sir Slice,
I am some merchandise.
I'm GJC.
and we are, as always, massive nerds. Oh, I had to bring it in. I did it wide because the last one was a wide angle shot, but here we go. Before we get into our Ahsoka episode 5 review, is that 5? Yeah. I always would like to give a shout out to my two wonderful co-hosts here with me, Smirch and GJC. Thank you very much for doing this with me. And to all those viewers at home, thank you. We appreciate it. As usual, if this is your first time watching, don't forget, click that little like and subscribe button. Put the bell on so you know when we're going live and when I post a new episode. So check it out. We appreciate you. Thank you. So in today's episode, we are going to be talking about Ahsoka episode 5. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that any of us have anything terribly detailed to go into, but I mean, overall, it was a good episode. I think for me, I liked the little backstory that you get because I didn't really see a ton of any of the previous shows, Rebels or Clone Wars. So it was nice. I'd seen some, so it was like, oh, okay, I know where they're going. It was cool seeing like a live action young version of Snips. I thought that was pretty sweet. Anakin, always solid again somehow, which is cool, and I'll let Dan get into that one in a little bit. It seemed mostly almost 100% a character episode for most everyone across the board. Obviously for Ahsoka, because that was like the depth of this episode was her kind of coming to terms with her history and the legacy and kind of grabbing that, holding it, and but also kind of like saying no, like, this isn't how I'm defined, this isn't only what defines me. So I thought that was kind of a nice little point that they had, and the way they represented it and the way they did it I thought was cool from my point of view.
Serious. Even you
Yeah.
mentioned Avatar last time around. Even more Avatar vibes with her whole
Oh, yeah.
shtick this time around as well.
Yeah.
So I thought that was fascinating.
It's hands down. I loved the way they had Anakin looking, the way Hayden looked throughout the episode. I thought that was really cool. The big takeaway for me, another one would have been with General Syndulla, and how, like for me, it's really like once a rebel, always a rebel. Whether you're in power, you're in a high seat of command, at your heart, like, she's a rebel, and so is Ahsoka, so is all these other people, because they were fighting in a time, or they lived through the time of the rebellion, not just the Clone Wars. So they've seen a lot and everything, and I kind of like that, and I kind of thought that was kind of cool to see. Some of the old rebellion kind of holding on, because at this point in time the rebellion is over and we're in the new republic. So in a time when you're supposed to be a government, there's obviously still going to people who are holding on to that and still rebelling, because no government is perfect. So those are my big takeaways for the episode. Dan, what do you got for me?
Space whales.
Yes, whale.
That's it.
Yes,
Space
whale.
whales. They're so great. They're so epic. They're
Space
so
Cthulhu's.
yeah. They're
Yes,
so what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, they're
Majestic.
that's the word. Thank you.
Majestic
They're
giants.
amazing. They're so cool. I don't know. I got a soft spot for whales.
Gentle
And
giants.
it's cool. It's cool to see them in space, and it's always like I kind of feel like everyone else in the show when they're watching them go by. I'm just like, oh, wow. They can jump through space. Don't know how that works. I think it kind of inherently, the whales raise more questions that we probably don't really get answers to, because that's like part of the mysticism, and that's okay. I'd like to know more though, personally. But
Sounds like they talked
watch
about
Rebels.
it in Rebels.
That's all I
Yeah.
can say.
well,
Yeah.
maybe I guess that's probably another reason for me to watch Rebels. Finally,
I mean, if you want to learn more about space whales, Rebels is the place.
I just a few quick tidbits. Hayden Christensen, man, still got it. That was the best lightsaber fighting that right off the bat. Anything I've seen in a minute, kind of making everyone look like chumps, to be honest. And I love the transitions of him to like Vader, and then him with the Sith eyes and coming out. I thought that was really well
that was
done.
cool.
I think that Jason should be Ahsoka's apprentice. I makes sense to me. But I can see Hera having reservations, seeing what happened to his father. So that's fair. Probably she's probably not too keen on him having the Jedi lifestyle. And now I'll get to my bigger point when we're all done here.
Okay.
So that's it.
What up, Tab?
Hey, Tab.
Tab?
What up, Tab?
Yeah, great points.
George, what are
I
your
was
points?
just gonna. We talked about this in previous episodes, but like the legacy, I really love how they highlighted the legacy that like Ahsoka and now Sabine come from. This long line of Jedi to master, these legendary characters that like you can imagine like the people who are now in modern time Star Wars, or at least present day for Ahsoka, looking back, those people must seem like the only people that I can think of is like war heroes from like yesteryear, you know, like Patton, or like maybe even like a JFK. These mythical, like Martin Luther King, these mythical, legendary, like war leaders and political figures that, you know, are from a bygone generation almost. So I think there's just this huge lineage that they come from. And I love how Anakin pointed out that like I was trained by Obi-Wan before the war during the time of peace. It's my job to train you, Ahsoka, unfortunately, in a time of war. And what Jedis need to be now are warriors. And like it or not, you need to be what is needed right now. And that's like a hard lesson, I think, that Ahsoka learns all throughout Clone Wars. Smirch pointed this out earlier on in like the first podcast about Ahsoka, is that she has like heart. Like, she has a lot of heart in Clone Wars and a lot of empathy for other people that Anakin maybe doesn't have. Certainly, he has sympathy for, like, Padme, you know, and those that are his friends, but he lacked heart sometimes in sympathy, you know, and empathy for other people. So it's very interesting. I love that whole thing. Of course, we already talked about the lightsaber. And then also I wanted to touch base with like Hewing literally just was like, they never listened to me. And he's totally right, dude. A minute after he told them to stick together, they just, yeah, okay. And then touching on Jason and Hera, I definitely picked up the vibes that like Hera does not want Jason to go down that path. And maybe that's something that Ahsoka respects. Obviously very affectionate towards the kid. You know, obviously they're like family because they went through a rebellion together, and probably Ahsoka was a big part of their lives immediately after the rebellion. So we get to see that they're actually a pretty knit group of rebels. And then a little bit of weirdness with like how the Force kind of works. I mean, I think we're still kind of trying to flesh that out at this point. I don't want to say it's like a huge shift of it, but it's like a more like a clear definition of kind of how it works, trying to clear it up. I don't know if that makes any sense, because it's like Hera kind of heard what Jason heard, like, but she's not a Jedi either, or she's not Force sensitive. Like, it's maybe it leads to more questions in the long run than anything. But yeah, just
we all know what camp I lie in on those matters. Who cares?
And then also, just one quick thing.
Spend your whole life trying to figure that out, and I'm just like, yeah, keep going. Next, give me the next scene. Here we go. That was cool. Yeah. She heard it. Good times.
It kind of also reminds me of one last thing I talked about last time was like the internet is very good at blowing things out of proportion and taking the tiniest thing, you know? Like, and this week it was like Anakin's scar is like not on his face in that last scene. So this is like Anakin from like before he met Ahsoka, or like immediately after, and he like time traveled into this world between worlds, and then he like pulled her it, and it's like give it a fucking rest, dude. Literally, like the first scene that he's in this episode, you see the scar. So like internet, like come on, like calm down, please. Like, can we stop with this with Star Wars? It's been going on for too long. Like, do not make a fucking like mountain out of a molehill.
I think the internet will respond with a resounding no. We're going to keep going.
But it's hilarious. I love seeing how like YouTubers and content creators get it all fucking wrong, like every single week. Every week, dude. Yeah. Every week, it's like clockwork. No, your theory was shit. Like you literally blew something out of the water that made no sense. Like, Okay, that's it.
So
That's all I got
I
to say.
want I want to reply to two of your points because it reminded me. One of them is involving I can't remember. The first one's really about like Anakin and his training and that line where I'm teaching you to be a Jedi in the time of war and
Hmm.
how it's a harsh truth. But given what we know about Anakin's trajectory and where he goes, I think to me this interaction was her kind of it coming to grips with her past, but it also being like, kind of like, do we think that that's like, I don't agree with Anakin in this particular case, like the Jedi were never supposed to be generals and be
That was
warriors
the downfall.
and all of that exactly, and that's the downfall. So to like kind of amp up like what he's saying, it comes to me where it's like, oh, like yeah, no, he's wrong because that's not necessarily what this time needs. You don't always have to just meet your situation with blunt force head on. You can be diplomats still. You can still try and find alternative solutions, whether maybe it's not sitting down and just chatting about it, but there's other ways. So I don't know. I liked that it was kind of acknowledging that like all of those things were like
I
him
think
being,
Anakin.
hot-headed.
I think Anakin said and did what he needed to get the right response and reaction from Ahsoka so that she can grow the way that she should. You know what I'm saying?
I think it
I
was the
don't.
way
I
he wanted. I don't think it was the way she should. That's what I'm saying. It's he wanted it in one way. And just because it's his way doesn't mean it's the way that
No,
she
I'm not
should
talking
grow.
about like
You mean
Anakin.
this
I mean
episode?
like this like current
Oh, okay.
Anakin that is in this world between worlds with Ahsoka.
Sure,
He
sure.
is showing her all these things to elicit the right type of response from her that he thinks she should be going forward to eventually face down Balin again. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So I take what is shown to her with a grain of salt of whether he truly believes that or not. That's like him playing a character to get her to like come to grips with her own personal demons, kind of, and whatever it is that she needs to go overcome personally. You know what I'm saying? It's not
Yeah.
like he's not really trying to kill her. Like you know what I'm saying? Like he's just trying to teach her a
Yeah.
lesson.
Yeah. I agree. Um I had something else. It might have been about Jason, but I can't remember. So Dan, I'm curious about your broad point question that you have here. I want to see what you mean.
The more I think about it, the more I think it's maybe not appropriate right now. Maybe this is an end of the series question, but I can't help but think. I've been
Throw it
thinking
out
about it
there.
a lot today, and I watched before I in the middle of all this, I kind of watched the all the honest trailers again for the sequel trilogy, and they're great, by the way. Um, and I just started thinking like a look at the reception that's been had for Hayden Christensen coming back to the Star Wars universe, and think about how we all felt and what we said about him, around the time of the movies, like the prequel, like movies release. Like, will we look back as kindly as we are now in the prequel movies, as we are? We'll be looking back kindly on the sequel trilogy. I didn't
I
word that
think
very well, but I wonder.
I think it's also
Uh,
like an age issue and presentation of when it
yeah.
was like presented to us. We were at the right age where we had seen like Star Wars, like the first original three trilogy, and probably grew up on it from our parents, right? But there's like a generation that I would say that is like maybe 10 years or 5 years, somewhere between like 7 to 10 years younger than us, who were like really young, and Star Wars Episode 1 was like their first exposure to seeing Star Wars on like the big screen, and they hold it like in a different way than like maybe you and
Hmm.
I are, who have experienced Star Wars
Yeah.
even before that. Do you know what I'm saying?
And
Like if
and the
you remember
big
Star Wars when it got re-edited or remastered, it came out in theaters, and I saw it in theaters. The original trilogies when
yeah,
they got redone.
yeah.
So that's
So
when
did
I
I.
first saw theaters like Star Wars in theaters. But like
And it
some
was
of kids
terrible.
who were 5 or 6 years younger, even up 7 years, 10 years younger, they never got to experience Star Wars in theaters until Episode 1. And
Hmm.
so you kind of think like that was their first real like major exposure to Star Wars. Like
Yeah.
you would hold the prequels a little bit differently.
And I
Maybe.
think I think the big thing we're forgetting is the internet.
It was rough.
We it's to the same sort of point is like yes, like the prequels were designed they weren't for necessarily us at
Mhm.
that time. I think I was 15,
We were in junior
16.
high.
right in that range because it was 1999, so it was right when right
We're in
before
junior
high
high.
school
It
or
was
whatever.
like
Yeah, I
our
was
last
15
year of
years
junior
old,
high.
and so we were not necessarily the target audience. It's still very much a kids movie, and so the people, like George was saying, the people that look back on those fondly are 15 years younger than us. I don't look back on those fondly at all. Those movies are, in my opinion, to this day, still the worst three movies that were made in the Star Wars trilogy. I enjoyed my time in the new sequels. Man,
You
that's
think
confusing.
episode 3 is worse than episode 9?
Um, Maybe not, but
If
it's
we're
not
taking trilogies
it's
that
not
together,
better.
he's putting the trilogies.
I
But
see.
I
I
would
got you.
The
also
first three.
I wouldn't say 3 is better than 9, but it might not be worse.
All
I'd
right.
put them on the same level because
When
if
you group them together, I guess.
the best part of 3 was the last hour. The first 2 hours or hour and a half, again, just dragging through fucking political fucking yada 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 yada
Mm.
yada. You know what I mean? Like it just drags and then it ends with a bang. It starts off fast, slows the fuck down, and ends with like an epic scene until the very last scene where no, and it all gets ruined again. But you know, I personally, just because, like, I'm not saying that the sequels were good by any means, 7, 8, and 9. I think 7 and 8 I can rewatch definitely. Because the nostalgia factor for the first one, you're like, okay, cool, new characters going through the same motions, whatever. It's fun. It's my original, hey, remember? And so then the second one was less of the hey, you remember? It was more of like a, well, you remembered, but let's fuck with your view. And I was like, okay, cool, yeah, that was all right. Like rewatching, the more I rewatch Last Jedi, I'm like, yeah, like this is kind of actually a really cool concept, and I would have loved to see what actually came of it. And then I think the reason for me 9 just sucked was because they were like, oh, I'm sorry, here's more of the 7. And I'm like, what the fuck, this is not a 9, this is an 8.2, you know what I mean? So
Mm.
but I think maybe, I do think that others will, as they grow, be able to look back. If this is someone's first experience with Star Wars in the big screens, and the first movies that they saw, then yeah, I think in 10 to 20 years from now, that core people who saw it will look back and go, man, yeah, those sequels were actually not terrible, because they'll maybe see the characters again in the future. Maybe we see Finn again
Oh, we
or
all know we're
Rey
going to see
again.
Ray again.
But I mean, not now. I mean, in 20 years, and they bring them back for like a special reunion. You know what I mean? Like that's what I mean. Is like, oh, all right. That'll hold that same significance as when we see Luke Skywalker, and we're like, oh, look, it's Luke. I remember him from The Thing. You know what I mean? He's in that other movie. You know what I mean? So,
And
I
then he
think,
just tossed his lightsaber.
yeah, I think time is Star Wars's best friend. You know what I mean?
Well, a lot of critics say they should just shutter it for like 10 years and not do anything and bring it back when they're ready, and that this oversaturation is just diluting their
Yeah.
product, which I
They're
totally
not.
hear points
Agree.
for.
They're not
So,
going to.
they're not going to
Yeah.
because they need to keep the money coming.
Yep.
The thing is, if you had told me, maybe a year or 2 or 3 or 4 years after the prequel trilogy came out, that Hayden Christensen was going to reprise his role as Darth Vader in future things, I would have been like, oh, fuck, man. Like,
Yeah. Exactly.
But he's doing pretty good,
Yeah.
and it's working. Right now, if you told me Rey is going to be in future movies, I'd be like, dude, Rey didn't have a single flaw to her. It made her character just like uninteresting. Like, maybe will feel differently in 10 years. Who knows?
Who knows? But sadly, they did tell us we're getting another Ray. So I'm like, I don't really.
Who knows? It
So
could
much
take
for-
10 years.
Will I see it
Yeah.
eventually?
At this point,
Will I see it
it
in
could take
theaters?
10 years for them to make a Ray movie.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really have much else to say. I think this show is doing pretty well on a scale of
Yeah.
things. I think it's doing
They're
all right.
stringing us along a little bit, but
This
it's still
this
pretty
episode
good.
was
You
in
have
movie
to.
theaters too. So for those of you who didn't
Hmm.
know, some people saw this. They
Of-
thought of it as a big enough episode to release it in theaters.
Mm, I would have rather have seen other ones in theaters, but actually, I guess cinematically, yeah, that would have been pretty sweet on the big screen, especially
Yeah,
when like
especially the war
they're
battle scenes.
yeah they're dropped back into
And
that
then like
dusty war scene.
a lot like I have a pretty decent sound system, so like a lot of the like Vader
Sounds
like
great.
stuff like him coming in had like really great like suspense and
Yeah.
music, and the sound of him breathing, like all of that, those special effects sound wise, I think would have been really great in a theater.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Yeah.
chills, like him, like those quick little flashes of him turning into Vader, like just
Mm, they're pretty good.
oof,
Pretty good.
like
Yeah. I don't know. You're right. There's something about it. Like he holds himself with a different weight in lately
I
Hayden
also think his
Christensen, and it's great
experience
because it
of
is
him as a
experience for
human and as an
sure.
actor through
But
like
like,
these last 50, 20 years, he's done a
you know,
lot of
the
acting, and he's
and
become a much better actor in the last 20 years
but
than
also
when he was in Star Wars. Like, come on, like
Well,
they're giving him a little bit more to do too. You know, a little bit more weight and depth and
yeah.
heaviness to the character as
uh,
opposed to just the younger shit.
I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the direction, because directing makes a difference.
Mm.
And as I've said before, and I'll say it again, I've seen Hayden Christensen in a movie where he did a very great job at
Mhm.
acting around or before the time of the prequel's release, and direction matters.
Oh
Mhm.
yeah, no,
The director matters.
you're not wrong, and you know Dave Filoni is
He had this
you know
Filoni has this
batting 1,000 almost.
Filoni has this beautiful like concept of like the relationship that Anakin and Ahsoka have, and that just really came through in this episode. Like you could see that he, even outside of what we've seen in Clone Wars and Rebels and all of that, there is just so much more backstory inside this man's head that he has for them that like we're probably never even gonna like ever
Yeah.
see.
It's funny because you look at Mando, you look at Boba Fett, you look at this, probably Andor as well. But like, this is what happens, Disney, when you give people who care about the IP a chance to just run with it. This is what
Mhm.
happens. You know what I mean? As opposed to you have a studio film, which is very much the sequels, very much studio films. You can tell they were very heavy-handed in what was to be done and how it was to be presented. And these feel almost more like independently run studio making Star Wars. It doesn't feel like Disney. I mean, yes, we could break it down and be like, well, Disney, but like they're the heart, the soul, the character development, like everything that they're doing. There's a connection between writer, director, actor, filmmaker. You know what I mean? All of those three, four, five things are connected by this like wonderful thing called love. Whereas in the other one, it's connected by this horrible thing called money. You know what I mean? So it's like this is what Disney needs to do, and I would even argue Marvel needs to continue to go back to doing that because they've really kind of stepped away and started making studio films. Not that they weren't. That's a conversation for another podcast that we've had dozens of times and will continue probably. But yeah. So for me, still good. Watch it, check it out. Let us know what you think. We'd love to hear comments. Anything else, gentlemen?
Any theories you guys have? Write down.
No. I'm
Thoughts.
not I'm
Write in
not
the
gonna
comments.
I'm not gonna give in to the internet. Oh, okay, not us. You're asking
Not
them.
us,
Yeah.
but anybody
If
listening.
yeah,
If they got
I want
theories
we
about anything we talked about, is what they
Yeah,
think is going to
please.
happen next, and like what's what, comment
Ha-
below. We'll definitely reply.
happy to hear it. Give it a little like and follow, and we'll be able to hear it and see. So, as always, if you've had a good time, we have been the Modern Nerd, and thank you for watching.